Thanks for joining us today on Session 4, Day 4 of ITPro Live 2020. I'm Justin Cupler, the Managing Editor for ITPro.com. And if you're a fan of both tech and the NFL, much like I am myself, this is one Q&A you're not going to want to miss because we have the CEO and founder of Pro Football Focus, Neil Hornsby, here to talk to us about big data and how it weaves into the NFL life. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and share all your insights on data and, of course, the NFL.
You're more than welcome, Justin.
Now, I know your time is pretty valuable here, so let's just dive into some questions, if I may.
Sure.
So for viewers who may not be familiar with Pro Football Focus, what does the site do? What does your data do?
Okay. So PFF collect and analyze more data on football than anybody else on the planet. We've also become something of a software company recently, and our premium product, PFF Ultimate, is used by all 32 NFL teams on a daily basis and 80 of the 130 FBS teams as well.
That's a lot of information to take in with what you do. Then, now, how did you start PFF? How did it actually begin? What were its roots?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a weird story because it literally started as a hobby. It started as something that I was just interested in. It was never meant to be anything more than that. And it grew just out of a passion for football. So I started off basically taking some of the money that I was earning as a business consultant and channeling it into my hobby, which was football, building a tool to collect data, visualize that data, and then also pay some people to collect more data than I can. Obviously, you need to scale the thing. You don't get very far trying to do this on your own. So it grew a little bit more quickly than I was expecting. I got a very interesting email back in 2009, completely unexpected, from the New York Giants. Initially, I just thought it was some of my friends taking the mickey because it was one of those emails that comes in not directly to your email, but from one of those things that you put on the website that allows people just to send you email questions. But it was the New York Giants, and they were very interested in what we were doing. So typically, as I sometimes do, I overshot my target marketplace. I was aiming at high-end fans for this and ended up with one of the premier teams in the NFL.
That's a pretty crazy story. It's kind of wild how a lot of these successful sites and businesses kind of start off just like you did as a hobby. I've spoken to a lot of people like that where it was just a hobby and then suddenly took off. So did you always know that data was going to be such a fundamentally important resource for businesses like the NFL?
Data's always been an interesting thing because I've spent a lot of time dealing with it in my previous life as a business consultant, etc. And it always felt that there was more resources to be able to generate the data and to visualize it and to do all sorts of things than actually make anything useful out of it. It's always been something which is you can only do something with data if you make it actionable. Having a ton of data is useless. Having all the machine learning in the world is useless unless you're then going to be able to take it and take some action off the back end of it. So I knew very early on that what I wanted to do with the data, I wanted to be able to grade players. I wanted to be able to say as accurately as we possibly could how well this player was performing on the field. And it's a really interesting thing because the first thing that we came across was an issue between what NFL coaches felt you were grading and what we were actually grading. Because when an NFL coach talks about a player, they typically talk in terms of talent. What we were talking about was in terms of production. So there's an interesting story that goes along with this is an NFL coach that one of our guys went on to work for talked about one of the players that he used to coach last year and said, "Oh, I don't particularly like what you were doing because I disagreed with the grade for X player." And the guy said, "Well," the guy that used to work for us said, "Well, he didn't play very well last year, in my opinion." And he said, "No, I know he didn't play very well, but he's a good player." And that's at the root of it, really, which is NFL coaches have a view as to a player's talent level and see him either up or down from that, maybe as a function as to how well they've coached him. And we call it production. So getting over that barrier, even when you know what you want to do, is interesting in itself. But yes, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew where we wanted to go with some of the data, and that's helpful towards understanding what sort of data you want to collect.
That's very intriguing. So how has your data, I'm sure it's played a huge role in all this, but how has your data allowed the NFL to improve itself?
So yeah, it's many ways. So the other thing that we knew that we needed to do, and this starts with another story, is when we started with the NFL and we were trying to sell the data in, we didn't have any visualization engines. We just had data. We had CSV files. We had, whatever you want. But we didn't have any visualization engine. So we'd be going to the NFL teams, and this is 10 years ago now. So it's before the analytics had really caught on in football. And we'd humbly be handing across our data and saying, "Please, sir, would you take our data?" expecting them to be able to do wonderful things with it, with all the resources that they had. And we would come back a year later and we would say, "Well, you must have loved the data, surely. Do you want to buy this data again?" And the response came, "Well, we didn't really get a lot of use out of it, and we didn't really, but manage to integrate it very well into our systems." And it was at that stage that I realized we needed to do something a little bit differently. So we started to build visualization tools, and it's very peculiar. But I just, along with our IT guy at the time, we built something that we called a scouting report. So this is back in probably about 2010. And we built this scouting tool, maybe 2011. We built it, and it was just my idea of how the data might be used. I was never expecting more than a demonstration of what the possibilities for the data were. We took that out of commission. Well, actually, we didn't even take it out of commission. It's still used by NFL teams to this day, which always amazes me. But we actually had to move it from our old database to our new database just recently. It was one of the last things that we moved across. And it's amazing to me that people were still using it and still found value in something that I just knocked together with the guy that we had. And you just chose a team, pressed a button, and it printed off 40 pages of reports for a particular team, what we call the scouting report. So it is interesting, but we knew we were going to need to get into software development. We knew we were going to have to really work with the difference between what they wanted and what they needed, because NFL teams operate a little bit inside a bubble, and they have done them much better now, but they used to operate inside a little bit of a bubble, which is, you don't know what you don't know, right? You haven't necessarily come from a background where you're all blue sky thinking. It all tends to be constrained inside what you know is the art of the possible. So it was pretty useful having these weird and wacky guys coming in from the side and saying, "Well, what happens if you do, what do you think of this?" "Oh, and sometimes you get there, "Well, this is useless to me." But sometimes you get, "Wow, this is fantastic. Where did this come from?" And you just take those things, and that's really what we built Ultimate on, which is the software product that allows an NFL coach effectively to do anything. So it's a set of standard reports, but they can build their own reports with inside it. but allows them to do any filter that they want on any piece of data any piece of data to do with football. So, for example, you can do things very, very quickly, such as tell me which quarterback in the third quarter against man coverage when on third and fourth down was the best. You pick third and fourth down, you pick man coverage, or you pick cover 1 and cover 3, whatever you want to do. And you just then put that in and it'll give you the list of players and you can select from those and do whatever you want. So we knew we had to build that tool to allow people to very simply do those things. But that's only relatively recently been built, but it's been a big success for us. As I say, it's used now by every NFL team's coaching department, by every NFL team's scouting department. So it's great for them when they want to scout a college player and they can say, okay, so this pass rusher, I know he plays predominantly on the right side of the line, but I want to see him from the left side of the line. What's his productivity like on the left side of the line? So show me all the times when he was in a 3-point stance on the left-hand side of the line in a pass rushing situation against third and more than 8. And then you do that, and then it allows you to then pull out play diagrams for that or just go directly to video. And that's what we've built, and that's what all the NFL teams now use. So
that sounds absolutely incredible. As a football junkie, I want to tear through that system and check out all the stats and see where everyone lands in different spots. That's amazing. So just before our call, you're talking about how the actual size of your database isn't quite as large as some people may think. Why is it not as large as people would think?
Well, probably for one of the reasons that we talked about earlier on, which is we collect the data which we feel is important to collect, and football, just by its very nature, it isn't a huge, subject really. I mean, if you look at it, there's about 40,000 roughly players in an NFL season. And for each of those, you've only got 22 players. And for each of those, there's only maybe 200 things they can do. That number doesn't scale very quickly. Those aren't huge numbers really, particularly if you're only collecting things you need to collect. We are adding bits and pieces in, the shoulder pad data, some of the XYZ coordinates. But those are things that people have made the mistake of trying to use as a base data set. So one of the problems that people have had with that particular data set is starting with this massive data and then trying to find things out of it that they, which are useful. And sometimes that's a little bit like looking for a needle in a haystack, whereas we've come from it. These things are useful. Now, let's look at the positions that we've got, which we know are highly accurate, and then which are the ones that aren't as accurate, and why is that? So what we found is clearly where we grade a player more often, the veracity of what the grade that we're giving them is very accurate indeed. The further away from the ball they are, for example, like a safety, the less interactions on the field they have, we would say that some of our grades aren't quite as accurate as they need to be. So what we're then able to do is to look and say, okay, so what can we do with the NGS data, the shoulder pad data, the XYZ coordinates, to look at what the range of that particular player had. So what we're doing is we're being able to take what's a huge thing and be able to push it down to a small data set to understand exactly what it is we're looking for. Tell me what additional value a safety can bring from the XYZ data rather than, I don't know, I'll go in and try and find something, So I think it's a different way of looking at things that we've had a lot of success with.
Incredible. So what are some of the challenges of sports analytics compared to working with more traditional business data?
That's interesting. So sports analytics, by their very nature, is the audience that need to understand it first and foremost are not particularly well versed in data. Now, you could argue that dealing with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, they may not be as well versed in data as some people, but I can almost guarantee they're going to know more about data than most NFL coaches. You know, some NFL coaches and some NFL, a large percentage of NFL coaches still insist on having everything printed for them. You know, it's an old school mentality that is very, very difficult to deal with. The example that we use consistently is every single data scientist, every single one, probably more, probably more data scientists than believe in climate change, will tell you that running backs in the NFL are by far the least important position for a whole host of reasons. You know, and it's not even like 97%, it's like 100%. I can't find a data scientist that will tell you that running backs particularly matter. You know, I can't find one. they're not like mad climate change guys who, you know, you'll always find some random guy who's been bribed enough to come up with some bullshit. So on that basis, there were still 4 teams that are drafting running backs in the second round and 1 in the first round. And that was the Kansas City Chiefs, who just happened to win the Super Bowl. Despite the fact that we know pretty much conclusively what matters in the running game is how the offensive line block. So, and the difference between the top running back and the 32nd running back is not very great in terms of what they will add additionally into the picture. So that's the problem, really. Despite all of the evidence, despite all of the statistics that have been done, despite all of the research, A.J. Dillon, who is probably about as poor a running back as you are likely to see for the NFL these days because of his style, is still being drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the second round. Not as an afterthought in the 7th round, but in the second round. And it's not like it's one of the other guys like a Josh Jacobs from last year or a Saquon Barkley where they have some value in the passing game, but it's still there. So that's the big problem for us, is we may need to go through that generational gap. We may need to almost wait for people to fully understand, because I still think you're going to get a lot of these general managers who are going to draft running backs despite all of the evidence.
Yeah, the NFL is a hard beast to change when it comes to the mindset, especially drafting. And speaking of the draft, we've talked a lot about the impact of data on performance of established players and teams. We spoke to scouting reports a little bit, but what role does your data play in the draft, if any at all?
Yeah. So it's a massive role, and truthfully, it's a far bigger role than probably our NFL data plays, because being able to determine which players are valuable, almost from what we were talking just about from running backs, but that goes on to every other position as well. So we've done a lot of work, data science work, in looking at what are the most valuable attributes for a quarterback when going forward. So one of the things that people would talk about was how that player performed under pressure being a massive indicator as to how they do at the next level. Well, what we found from our analysis is that isn't necessarily true, because the most valuable predictor in understanding how a college quarterback is going to do at the NFL level is what they do from the most frequent opportunity they have, which is from a clean pocket to a receiver, to an open receiver. So can they hit the easy throws? That's by far the biggest predictor. What they can do out of a clean pocket. Because it's interesting going back and looking at Christian Hackenberg and everybody. Christian Hackenberg drafted in the second round by the New York Jets. And everybody said, oh, he's got a big arm. And when he gets to the NFL level, they'll coach him up and he'll be fine. Well, it's very difficult to coach up a player whose ability to hit a ball, to hit a target less than 5 yards in front of the line of scrimmage and behind. So the shortest throws you can possibly make was ranked 112 out of 125. Good luck on coaching that up. But still people thought that Christian Hackenberg was coachable. We said he was completely undraftable. And I think we've been proved probably right. But those things are important. Those criteria are the most important ones to look for. Can the guy do the simple things well? That's the most important thing, because that's the most important thing in football. If you're given an open target, can you hit it more often than not? That's the crucial thing. So we're doing that, and we're looking through each position in the NFL draft, and we're looking for what are those important things. Not how fast can they run. If it's important, that's important, then great. Well, I'll give you an example. So I'll give you an example from the other side of things where we've learned from our mistakes. Deion Jones, when he was drafted by the Atlanta Falcons, I think it was 2014, we had him as the 250th best player, much to our embarrassment, in the draft. He went in the first round. So obviously when he turned into a great player, we've got to ask ourselves, what did we do wrong? What did we get wrong about that? Indeed, we did. Did we get anything wrong? Was he just an outlier? But the problem that we had was we overvalued Deion Jones's play in run defense, because Deion Jones isn't exactly the most solid tackler on the planet, and he wasn't at the time. But back in 2014, we were overvaluing run defense. And realistically, the only thing that matters, or the main thing that matters by far for a linebacker, is pass coverage. So therefore, we made the mistake of overvaluing something that wasn't particularly valuable. Now we've made those changes, and we're able to look through those things, and we're able to put the right weighting onto each of the attributes of the individual player. So hopefully we don't make the Deion Jones mistake again. But it's another thing, which is just the continually looking, the continual improvement loops in what you do, and making sure that you're not overreacting to an outlier, but you're overreacting to something that's a problem inherently with the way that you are looking at individual players.
Well, your data definitely won me over with the Hackenberg reference, so you win there. Yeah. So another question here: are there any particular NFL teams? I don't have to name names if you cannot. But are there any NFL teams in particular who are making impressive use of the data you provide?
Yeah, they're all getting better. They are all getting better. But I mean, when you look at the teams that are doing the most, I'm not saying they're following our lead. They're doing their own thing. But one of the teams that I believe have made the most use of analytics are the Baltimore Ravens. So they've done a tremendous job of understanding when to go for it on fourth down. You know, just that the value of each of their individual judgments at that particular, for that particular place on the field have been very, very good indeed. And they have gone for it far more often than most people. We're not saying you should always go for it, but certainly generally more often than not. Normally when you've got an opportunity inside the opponent's half of the field, and you're at less than 3 yards, you should very rarely be punting. Very rarely be punting. So the Baltimore Ravens do a very, very good job. There's a lot of smart people. They've got a lot of highly incredibly smart people in their analytics department. That said, they drafted a running back in the second round as well. They may have more use for him than most teams have because of what they're going to play. And the idea that J.K. Dobbins is that home run hitter, through wide open holes that are made available by Lamar Jackson and his ability to run, means it's far less egregious than it would have been for a whole host of other teams, but he still wouldn't have been our choice. Having said that, the rest of their draft was great. Absolutely outstanding.
Oh, being from Pittsburgh and rooting for the Steelers, that's not good information for me to hear.
Burger got left, yeah.
Who knows? Maybe one or two, if that.
Yeah.
So are there any data science tools in particular or methodologies that you found particularly transformational, or any upcoming ones that you're excited about?
We are that's probably a question that's a little bit out of my remit. What I can talk about is some of the things that we've done, which have potentially been some mistakes in this area, and in the way of turning that might be interesting to people in the way that we've gone about productionizing data science code. So most of our guys typically code in R. It's a reasonable language for people to be able to pick up and to quickly be able to do some analysis on, specific data. But at the end of the day, if that becomes useful to us, we need to take that and we need to be able to productionize it in a way that is repeatable if that person then goes under a bus. It's just standard stuff, yeah, for most people. But one of the things that we haven't done a good job of, or we hadn't done a good job of until recently, is taking that code and being able to take the person who developed that code out of the equation. So we've been working much more with AWS and SageMaker to be able to productionize those things. And we are having a debate as to whether we should find somebody, whether it's of use to put our data scientists to one side, the smart guys, let them code in whatever they want, and then let somebody else take that code, and their job is specifically to move it into Python, say, for example, or something that integrates much more easily with SageMaker, or somebody that's going to put that product, they're going to productionize the code. I don't know. We're still going through that debate whether we should be using our analytics guys, our data science guys to productionize code, and if that's a good use of their time. So it's a little bit down in the weeds, but a very interesting debate. And if anybody wants to talk to me about that sort of thing that's in a laugh, please, I'm all ears. I like to hear what other people are doing in that area as well.
Yeah, a lot of your data has, of course, pretty much all of it has to do with on-the-field performance, scouting players, scouting teams, scouting situations. But I'm curious, does your data ever move off the field, like moving into merchandising or how teams run their businesses? Does your data ever skew towards that side?
It doesn't at all. But clearly what we do from time to time is we use our resources internally to be able to look at our customer base, because not only do we have a number of NFL customers and college customers whose numbers are very easily digested, but we also have tens of thousands of customers to our Edge and Elite products that need to be understood more effectively. So what we may do is we may take it and use those skills internally to be able to better understand our consumer customer.
Sports data science has been brought to the forefront by, like 2011's Moneyball film that brought a lot of it out. Since then, how much has really changed in the data science realm in terms of sports?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wrote about this for Peter King about a year ago. In terms of one of the questions was, they were talking about the number of people that were in baseball compared to in football, and obviously the number in football was significantly less, and asking really why that was. And I said, while things were improving, I did believe that one of the biggest issues in football is because you're dealing with a significantly smaller data set, you have to ask better questions, really. You have to know really more what you're dealing with. And one of the most crucial parts to that is finding people who understand football. You can find people who understand football anywhere. You can go and talk to coaches, high school coaches, they understand football. You can also go and find people who understand data science relatively straightforwardly. People who have degrees in data science, you can, again, find them relatively easily. But if you put those two sorts of people in a room together and expect good things to come out of it, then I think your chances are minimal, because those two types of people don't talk to each other well, and they're effectively talking in completely different languages. And we found you need translators. You need somebody that can speak football and can speak data science and can help those two groups to come together and translate for them. Those people are incredibly hard to find. Incredibly hard to find. People that know football at the level that they can sit down with an NFL coach and have a cogent conversation about football, and people who understand data science that they understand the math, that their math is well beyond, the what you would expect from a high school graduate, is difficult to find. We're very lucky in the fact that we've gone out to specifically find those people, and we have, I believe, the best data science group who can perform that role in the business, and we've gone specifically to find those guys. So those translators are hugely important for football teams. Now, I know they are getting better, but back in the day, what some of the football teams were doing is they would go and they would just look for a data scientist. And there would be some diktat that came down from the owner. We need to have some data scientists. So the football guy would then go out, the football staff would then go out and say, I need a mathematician. So they go to some big company, they go to a Smith Klein Beecham or a GE and say, right, I want a data scientist. And they would have no shortage of people coming in who wanted to do those jobs because it's football and it's cool and it's great, But what they found in the majority of cases was those people, when they brought them in, didn't understand enough about football to be able to have sensible conversations with the football staff, and therefore the football staff would pat them on the head, treat them, put them into the corner. Oh, you wanted to, boss, the owner, you wanted to know about my data? That's him there, over there in the corner. He's the little weedy guy. That's him. So they would do that, and then that would be them doffing their cap to data science. And by the same token, a lot of these guys, because they just didn't have the understanding of football, couldn't force their way through the football infrastructure that they needed to be able to get their ideas actualized during the games or during the processes that were required. So that whole process is incredibly difficult. And I think more so in football, because in baseball, the numbers are great enough that you still have that process, but it becomes much more of a data science problem than necessarily a logic problem in the football side of things. I think there's 143 times less players in a football season than there is in a baseball season overall. So you get away a lot more with mathematicians who know a little bit of baseball in baseball than you would in football. So that's my completely non-scientific view as to why some of this has happened and why it's taken a little bit longer in football.
Very interesting. Now we're seeing a lot of emerging technologies coming down the pipe, particularly 5G and IoT, Internet of Things. Do you think those going to have a significant impact in your field?
Not particularly. I think the thing that's likely to be the next step is being able to do video capture. So one of the big problems with shoulder pad technology is the RFID chips just aren't that accurate, and they don't do a good job. You know, they're not that accurate even in telling you where a player is on the field. I think the NFL made a little bit of a mistake in going with that technology over camera technology, but they've invested in it now, whatever it was, 60 million or whatever, to, you know, kit out the stadiums, and they will probably continue to try and get the technology to be a little bit better. But at the moment, it can't. You know, there was supposed to be an X coordinate, a Z coordinate on it, and that isn't there. There was supposed to be a rotational coordinate on it that would tell you in general which direction the player was facing, and that's not really come through. Those things may come through, but at the moment they're all limitations. So the way forward, I think, is in camera technology. But are people going to be able to get our broadcast cameras and cameras, a couple of cameras being located in the stadium that don't cost a ton of money, going to be able to do a better job of providing XY coordinates in that you can do work on and work out the speeds of players from, rather than shoulder pad technology? So I think that's probably the next step in terms of video tracking, call it whatever you want, in terms of being able to do it. But that's still inaccurate at the moment as well. But as the ability to go to 4K cameras and the ability to get much more granular footage becomes available, I'm guessing that'll be the next step. They may get the shoulder pads right. I don't know. I think basketball, with what they've done, and obviously they've got a much easier job on the smaller court, indoors, all of that sort of stuff. I've done far better things with their tracking technology. But that's the next thing from my perspective, is where does that go?
Excellent. A couple more questions. We're getting a little short on time, so I'll be quickly here. So your passion for football brought you into the world of data science, as we were speaking about before the call. Do you think hobbies like fantasy football or stat tracking could lead someone toward a career of data science?
Yeah, it absolutely can. It absolutely can. And for the reasons that I've said, but you've got to also commit to understanding football at a level beyond just who's likely to be the guy who's going to, score the most touchdowns next year or things like that. We have 2 maths professors on staff, literally maths professors. That's the level that we're looking for now. You need to commit to getting really, really good at what you do. You need to commit to getting really good at football at a very high level, and you need to get your maths to a very high level. I think if you want to put up a YouTube video and tell a few people and be an entertaining guy, what is likely to happen? I'm sure you can do that. I always look at fantasy guys in 2 ways. There's 2 sorts of fantasy guys I look at. There's the entertainer. The entertainer is the guy who can talk a good game, who's entertaining to audiences, who makes people listen. But generally, and I'm saying generally, and it's fairly good, their math is not normally that good. You'll never normally see those guys rank the highest consistently in fantasy competitions. You know, if they have a fantasy accuracy competition, those aren't those sort of guys. And then you've got the other sort of guys who really, really grind the numbers, really do the work. The guys who consistently head up those accuracy competitions and who maybe not the most entertaining or do the best in front of video, but they can tell you what's likely to happen. And it's those latter sort of people that clearly have the biggest chance of moving forward into actual football. The former probably have more chance of being on the NFL Network.
So we got one final question for you. This one's a tough one, so please take your time on it.
Okay, yeah.
Last question. So, who is your pick to win the Super Bowl? Is it going to be the Patriotless, or the Brady-less Patriots, or the recently patriotized Buccaneers, or someone else altogether?
Yeah. Well, if the Patriots win the Super Bowl with Jarrett Stidham, then this will. I mean, however, Bill Belichick for me has always been the greatest coach of all time, but you know that seals the legacy beyond anything else, because I think the chances of them doing it, I think they're significantly overvalued in the odds at the moment because of Bill Belichick and because of what they've done previously. But this is sans Tom Brady, and this is a different world. Kansas City Chiefs are the favourites, about 6-1 or something generally, and therefore it's very difficult to stray away from the best quarterback and playing with one of the two best coaches. Why would you? Because those are the two key things. 6-1, not exactly the best odds though. I also somewhat like, I think about, 12, 13-1 on New Orleans for Drew Brees' final season. They're always a very well coached, very good all-round team. I really like a lot of the moves that Mike McCarthy's made since moving to Dallas. I don't know whether you get 20-1 on Dallas still, but if you can, then that's pretty good. And then the final one, if you were looking for the outsider that I think have been massively, massively undervalued, Atlanta Falcons at 40-1 they've still got Matt Ryan, and they were coming forward towards. I know they've always flattered to deceive since the Super Bowl, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride. But at 40-1, I just fancy them. But if you're asking for one, I'm going to go with the bookies. They're not too far wrong. And the Kansas City Chiefs, as I said, with, in my opinion, the best quarterback, and probably in the top two coaches, maybe top three coaches, depending upon which way you go. I don't think you can look past Kansas City again.
That's fair enough. The answer we're looking for is the Pittsburgh Steelers, of course, but that's okay. We can forgive you once. But, that's all the time we have for today.
Possible.
What's that?
Everything's possible.
It could be, if he doesn't break his elbow again.
Yeah.
So that's all the time we have today, Neil. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our viewers for checking us out on session 4 today.